I've had so many students tell me that they don't know how to answer OEQs and tell me if you can relate. So unfortunately, what happens most of the time is that in school, you're learning the content, which is good, but often there is a lack of focus on how to actually answer open-ended questions and the thought process behind it. So in this video, I want to help you with that. I'm going to give you the FIRED checklist, which I teach to all my students. Plus at the end, I'm going to give you one golden rule that if you just follow that rule, you will immediately see a lot higher marks in your OEQs. If you don't know who I am, my name is Keefe, founder of ThatBioTutor, and I help make the subject a lot easier for students while making their lives a lot easier. The first step in the checklist is F, which stands for focus. So ask yourself, what is the focus of the question? You see, examiners don't set questions randomly. They have a focus for each question in mind, which is to test you on a certain concept or sub-concept to reveal whether you really know your stuff, whether you really study. So if you don't know what's the target to hit for that question, your answer will be all over the place and you most likely won't be answering the question. Let's use this example of a question that asks, explain the effect of increasing temperature on rate of photosynthesis. So now your job is to put yourself in the shoes of the setter and think, what concepts is this setter trying to test me on? So photosynthesis belongs to the topic of nutrition in plants. And then temperature affecting photosynthesis is actually a sub-concept which they're testing on. If you've studied your content, you will know that enzymes is actually involved in this sub-concept. Enzymes is another topic that is also part of this question's focus. The next step in the checklist is I, which stands for irreplaceable words. These are the keywords which you need to put in your answer. Markers are looking for these exact words, so unfortunately you cannot paraphrase them into your own words. Now, how do you know what's a keyword? If you go to a random person on the street who doesn't study bio and you ask them, hey, what's this word? If they don't know, then it's probably a keyword. Once again, this is proof to the marker that you've actually studied. If you did the previous step of finding out what's the focus of the question and you figured out which concepts are being tested, your mind will automatically go to the keywords related to those concepts. So using the earlier example that I gave, enzymes, well, the related keywords will be kinetic energy, rate of collision, enzyme substrate complexes, denature, active site, and so on. So if you're doing that question, your job is to try and put in as many of those related keywords as possible into your answer. And now for our next point, R, which stands for relevance. What relevance means is simply this, is what you're writing actually answering the question. You know that really frustrating person in your life when you ask them a question and then they start going off on some kind of rant about something completely different and they get sidetracked, but they barely gave you the answer you were looking for? Well, that's exactly how the markers feel when you write an answer that is irrelevant. And to be honest, I used to have this problem myself because I have this habit of like once my brain thinks of a possible answer, I just go straight to writing it down. But after I read what I wrote, I regret because I realized it was actually a waste of time. It wasn't answering the question. And some of you might relate to this. So after you have thought of a point and your pen is just about to touch the paper, just pause and ask yourself, is this point that I'm going to write actually directly answering the question? A good way to figure this out is to read the question again. It's completely fine to read the question multiple times. And then you decide on whether or not to write that point. Relevance is pretty much the number one reason why students lose marks in open-ended questions. And it's so sad because number one, you don't get the mark and yet you waste your time. Number two is that it misleads you into thinking you have written enough for that question just because there are a lot of words, but actually you haven't written enough relevant points to score the full marks. And then students just stop writing there because they think, oh, look, it's so long already. So please be very careful about your relevance. It's alright to read the question over and over again. At this point, I also want to use the time to tell you about a trap that many students will fall into, which I've seen in my own students' answers as well, which is that at the start of their answer, they provide a short para of background information. Sometimes they'll spend 1 to 2 sentences on this, and when the question is only 4 marks, it's 2 marks worth of so-called background info. But the problem with background info is that it never addresses the question head on. It's very vague, and oftentimes it doesn't achieve much. So what's the solution to background info? If it's not helping to answer the question directly, then don't write it at all. But if it's actually part of your answer, then please just weave it into your answer. I'm going to show you a clip from one of my recent lessons to show you what I mean by weaving the background info into your answer. Look at the first point. What's that describing? First point is describing the process of transpiration, right? It's not a very full description, but it is partial description. So it's just like a very factual, very statement kind of thing. It's not directly answering the question. Do you see? The question is, oh, blows at the plant, why did it become wilted? You have to link these two facts. Blow at the plant, become wilted. So that will be answering the question. But this here, is it linking that? No, right? It's just a background info. Whenever you see background info in the answer, it's usually a bad sign because background info is generally quite vague and it's not targeted at answering the question. Okay, so never phrase your answer as background info. You should always have a purpose. Okay, a very clear purpose to the marker. Then you see the second point. When the fan blows at the plant, then blows water vapor away, steep concentration. So actually the solution would be if this student took this stuff and weaved it into this answer. Okay, so if they combine this, then it would be good. The next step, E, stands for elaboration. So how do you actually elaborate? One of the best ways to think about this is imagine that the marker is a young, innocent and curious child. You know, sometimes young children will keep asking the very obvious things like, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Why must we do this? Or like, why is there a green man sign when we walk across the road? So they ask all these basic, obvious and sometimes dumb sounding questions, but it's a very good way to remind yourself how to elaborate when writing your answer. Imagine there's a child that keeps asking you why, and in a very innocent way just because they want to understand more. So example, when temperature goes beyond the optimum temperature, you would write that enzymes denature and the rate of reaction goes down to 0. But now imagine that little child asking you why. Why does the reaction slow down? Just because of the denaturing. That's where you will add in the elaboration that when an enzyme denatures, the shape has changed and the shape of the active site changes too. So now the substrate cannot fit into the active site anymore. That's why the rate of reaction goes down. So use this on yourself to generate more elaboration. Another tip I have here for elaboration is to just try and be more specific. Instead of just saying enzyme loses its shape, say the active site of the enzyme loses its shape, because that's more precise as to which part of the enzyme you're talking about. And the good thing about this is it leads to you writing in more keywords, which will only serve to increase your marks. Something that I see students have problem with when it comes to elaboration is that they have missing links and missing logical gaps in the flow of their answer. So the truth is a lot of you know the content and you're pretty smart already. So to you it's obvious and you don't need to write it down. But once again, imagine that there is this innocent young child asking you why, because they don't have all those facts which you have. So to you it's obvious, but to them they don't know. So you must lay out everything step by step, really handhold that child from the start of your answer to the end of your thought process. So if you do that for the marker in your OEQs, you will see a lot less of those carrot arrows and you will see higher marks. But at this point you might be wondering, if I elaborate so much, then my answer will be like an essay every single time. And that's correct, which is why we need to hold back by knowing how deep to explain into the question. That comes to the last part of the checklist, which is D for depth. And how do you know the depth? Look at the mark allocation. 1 mark is equal to 1 key idea. And usually that's 1 sentence or half of a sentence if it's quite a long one with multiple keywords. One secret for you to know how to judge what constitutes 1 mark is to just learn from the answer keys. You can see where they assign marks to and you'll very quickly get a feel for it. In my opinion, I usually try and be very conservative with the marks, meaning I assume that the markers are not lenient and I assume that they are very demanding. So they want a lot of keywords and a very substantial point before they even give me each mark. This way, no matter whether the exam's marker is lenient or very strict, you will still be safe. Okay, and as promised, I'm going to give you a bonus tip. This is the golden rule for OEQs. If you just learn this from the whole video, you will immediately see your OEQs becoming better. So when I was Sec 3 and Sec 4, there was this guy in my class who got quite average grades. Then one exam, he got really high, I think nearly full marks. So I asked him, how do you do it? I looked at his paper also and saw his answers. And then he told me the secret for bio is just spam. Now, is that a very good rule? No, because if you just write anyhow, you may hit some points, but anything that is not relevant, the marker will just be blind to it. And honestly, that wastes a lot of your time in the exam. So instead, the real secret here is to spam relevant keywords. The reason why that worked for the guy in my class was because he happened to hit a lot of keywords along the way while spamming. So why not just do it the smart way and go straight to those keywords? So please keep this in mind, and every point that you are writing for an OEQ, from now on, ask yourself, can I squeeze in more relevant keywords? And you will start seeing your OEQs doing better and better. I just want to give you a disclaimer that the skills I've taught you here will only work if your content foundation is actually good. If your content is very poor, then please go and fix that first. If you found this kind of video helpful, then please give it a like and subscribe because I'll be making more of them. If you're taking O Level Pure Bio and you're tired of struggling alone and you want me as your coach and your guide, you can apply for my class. Link is in the description. If you need help with content, then I highly recommend you check out this video here, which has tons of content help and memory hacks.